I've driven this stretch of highway 100 times, the monotony of gray pavement blending into darker gray sky, seasoned sporadically with the neon splash of a roadside diner or gas station. But tonight was different. A late start from Denver meant the sun had already sunk behind the Rocky Mountains, leaving an inky blanket speckled only by the distant, weak flicker of my car's headlights, and whatever poor souls shared this isolated route. The first sign that something was off was the exhaustion. It wasn't your garden variety end of a long day tired. This was a deep, marrow-sucking weariness that made my bones feel like they were folding in on themselves. I decided to stop at the next rest area. Mistake number 1. It wasn't a place I recognized, despite my countless trips along this road. It appeared around a bend almost whimsically, like a scene from an old movie where travelers find shelter in a mysterious inn. A single dim streetlight flickered hesitantly as I pulled in, providing minimal illumination but plenty of eerie shadows. The rest stop looked dated, with cracked concrete and a weather-beaten sign that read Havern Point Rest Area. The attendant's booth was lit, a lone beacon in the dimness, yet no attendant was visible. I parked and sat for a moment, considering the wisdom of stopping here. Then I recalled the heavy sag of my eyelids and how the road's hypnotic emptiness nearly lulled me into oblivion moments ago. Stepping out of the car stretched my stiff legs, but did nothing to relieve the unnerving chill that crawled up my spine. The wind howled around the barren trees encircling the rest stop, carrying a faint, inexplicable smell of old, burning oil. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through me. A rumpled piece of paper, weighted down by a small rock, sat on the picnic table near the booth. Curiosity outweighed caution, and I picked it up, unfolding it to reveal hastily scribbled rules. 1. Do not speak to the attendant. 2. Use the restroom on the left. Knock 3 times before entering. 3. Ignore any whispers from the vending area. 4. Do not look into the mirrors for longer than 5 seconds. 5. Stay within the light. Shadows are deeper than they appear. 6. Leave before the clock strikes 12:00 a.m. My rational mind spun with questions. Was this some kind of prank? Local kids trying to scare clueless travelers? Despite my skepticism, the crawling unease didn't subside. I glanced at my watch. 11:15 p.m. Not much time if I was taking these seriously. Choosing the lesser of 2 evils, I decided to heed the second rule and headed to the marked restroom on the left. Approaching, I hesitated, then knocked 3 times, half expecting a response. Silence greeted me, and I entered. A rank smell of mildew mixed with pine cleaner hit me, and the flickering overhead light made every surface look slick and grimy. I did my business quickly. Exiting, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur seemed to drift from the direction of the vending machines dimly visible across the concrete lot. Curiosity tugged, but remembering Rule 3, I forced myself to turn away. Then, a figure shuffled into the limited glow of the booth light. They were dressed oddly, nondescript, too bulky for the season. Need any help? Their voice grated, almost too informal, friendly in a way that chilled rather than warmed. Rule 1 screamed loudly in my mind, and I found myself blurting out, "No, thanks," without stopping. I hurried back to my car, heart racing disproportionately to my brisk but modest pace. My hands fumbled with my keys. Had they always felt this slick? Just as I slid into my seat, a resounding clang echoed from behind me. A large metal trash can overturned, perhaps. But something about the timing felt planned, methodical, and I slammed my door shut, locking it instantly. Rolling down my window just enough to keep an eye on the time and on any movements outside, I stared at the clock. 11:53 p.m. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation, or maybe it was just my frazzled nerves. A softer sound, like gravel crunching underfoot, crept towards my car. Every logical impulse told me to start the vehicle and leave. But another part, maybe the most human part, needed to see, to understand what was off about Havern Point before I could drive off. That's when I saw it. Under the solitary streetlight, a small, unsettlingly familiar figure approached, its presence wholly wrong yet undeniable. And it wasn't alone. The figure, shrouded by shadow, despite the jaundiced glow of the streetlight, glided closer, each step measured, almost mechanical. Its companions fanned out, forming a semicircle that slowly closed in on me. My heart clattered against my ribcage, my breath caught in my throat. The familiarity of the initial figure scratched at the back of my mind, a nagging whisper that refused to solidify into coherent thought. I tried to move, to take a step back, to run, anything, but my feet felt as if they had been poured full of concrete. Trapped by fear or some unseen force emanating from the figures, I could only watch as they approached. Their faces began to emerge from the darkness as they entered the fuller light. Skin pallid, eyes unnaturally bright, shining with what might have been excitement or hunger. My stomach churned at the sight. My instincts screamed that this was wrong, all wrong. But then the central figure stepped into the clearest light, and recognition finally struck with the force of a blow. "M. Michael?" My voice was a hoarse whisper, disbelief coloring the edges of the single word. Michael, my brother, who had disappeared without a trace nearly 3 years ago. His face was thinner now, gaunt even, and his eyes, those weren't the warm hazel eyes that used to crinkle up when he laughed. These eyes were a vivid, eerie silver, seeming to reflect the light rather than absorb it. He didn't speak, just continued to advance, his expression blank. Were those even his real eyes? The thought flickered through my panicked brain like a faulty streetlight. I took a forced step backward, my legs shaking. "Don't come any closer," I managed, my voice cracking as I spoke. Michael halted, tilting his head slightly, a bird-like, jerky motion that was so unlike him. But it was what stood behind him, in the gloom beyond the streetlight's reach, that sent a fresh wave of dread spiraling through me. Shapes, twisted, human-like but wrong in proportion and movement. They swayed and twitched, as if listening to a rhythm I couldn't hear. Without warning, Michael's face twisted, contorting into a semblance of sadness, or maybe it was pity. "You shouldn't have followed me," he murmured, his voice raspy, like he hadn't spoken in ages. Following him? I had been searching, yes, but how did he know? Was he truly Michael, or something else wearing his skin? I shuddered at the thought. The air grew colder, and a thin, high whine started up at the edge of my hearing, making my eardrums itch. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse, slow and heavy, like the beat of an enormous heart buried under the asphalt. "I need to go home," I said, surprising myself with the calmness of my voice. "You need to come home too, Michael. Mom's been," my voice broke, "she's not been well." His expression softened momentarily, then the eerie silver of his eyes swelled, drowning out any human emotion. "I can't, not anymore." His voice was a mere whisper, but carried an edge of finality that made it clear there was no room for argument. Something like a sigh rustled through the hidden watchers behind him. A chill breeze picked up, twisting around us, carrying a low, sorrowful moan that might have been just the wind or voices of the others, mourning what Michael had lost, or perhaps warning me. Suddenly, Michael stepped forward, placing a cold hand on my shoulder. His touch was icy, painful. "Forget me, run." His voice was urgent, a hiss between clenched teeth. I recoiled from his touch, more from the shock of his coldness than the fear of him. As I stumbled backward, the streetlight flickered violently, buzzing like an angry insect. In that sporadic illumination, Michael and his unsettling entourage were briefly obscured. When the light stabilized, they were gone, vanished as if swept away by the wind. But the moaning continued, a sound too mournful to bear. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of my sight, Michael's voice echoed one last time, a ghostly whisper carried back to me. "Remember me." I bolted, not daring to look back, the echo of his plea ringing in my ears, mingling with the haunting chorus that seemed to saturate the very air. Every shadow flickered with potential horror, every wind-blown whisper felt like a fingertip brushing against my back. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and the familiar lights of my house flickered into view. But even then, the terror followed, a silent stalker always just out of sight. As I stumbled through the uneven frost of my front lawn, the whispers seemed to thicken with the fog, encasing my home in a cold, soundless tomb. The locks clicked open under my fumbling hands more out of familiarity than any conscious effort. Once inside, I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it, as if the thin wood could shield me from the horrors outside. The safety of the lit rooms felt like a farce. My breathing slowed, but each exhale seemed to tremble, intermingling with the howling draft that slipped beneath the door. I tiptoed through the house, switching on every light I passed, banishing the shadows back into the corners they belonged. Yet, the light felt artificial, too clean against the creeping dusk that pried through the gaps in the curtains. In the kitchen, I fetched a glass of water. My reflection in the window above the sink watched me, a second too delayed, eyes a tad too hollow. I cast the glass aside, leaving it to shatter against the stone floor. The noise it made seemed deafening in the silence, a sharp disruption to the soft thrumming that now seemed to pulse from within the very walls. Retreating to the living room, I clutched my phone, considering someone I could call. But as the contact list flickered on screen, the names seemed foreign, as distant and unhelpful as journal entries from a long-forgotten life. The fire was unlit, the ashes gray and cold, but the hearth seemed to moan quietly, as if the echoes of Arctic winds snuck down the chimney. I moved closer almost unconsciously, drawn by the need to feel something, even if it was just a colder air than that provided by my increasingly suffocating home. My eyes fixed on a single remaining ember that glowed softly. It was oddly hypnotic, swaying back and forth, although there was no breeze to stir it. The couch offered no comfort as I sank onto it, the cushions enveloping my weight warily, as if it too recognized something altered within me. That's when I heard it, the laughter. It was distant at first, like the murmuring of a crowd far away, but gradually it protruded through the walls, singular and sharp. A child's laugh, but sullied with a malice that no child's voice should carry. Frozen, I could only listen as it grew closer, not daring to move. Each peal of laughter was like a chisel chipping away at the brittle sanity I clung to. The temperature dropped, my breath visible in the air, each puff a white cloud dissipating into the growing cold. I strained my ears, trying to discern any footfall over the cackle that now seemed to bounce from wall to wall, a macabre echo chamber. The laughter halted abruptly, an unfinished symphony that left a vibrating silence. Then, clearer than before, from what seemed like just outside the living room door, a soft whisper. "You didn't run far enough." The door creaked open by an inch, a darkness peering through the gap, deeper than the rest of the night. My heart thundered in my chest, each throb screaming at me to react. But it wasn't until the foul smell of decay swept into the room that my limbs finally burst into action. I darted upstairs, my footsteps heavy and loud against the wooden floor, every creak a proclamation of my location. By the time I reached my room and slammed the door shut behind me, I realized the laughter had never ceased. It had followed me, every bit as swift as my shadow. Closet, the thought flashed through my head, primal and frantic. hide, as if such simple barriers could offer any sanctuary from what hunted me. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, contracting around me like the chest of a slumbering beast. Crouched in my closet, behind the rows of hanging clothes, my breath shallow and quick, I waited for a salvation that didn't come. The laughter matured into words, sung softly through the cracks of my house, a sinister lullaby just for me. Ready or not. The sound of something scraping along the walls outside drew my gaze upward toward the closet door. My eyes widened with horror, not daring to blink, as the door handle began to slowly, ever so slowly, turn. The rusty creak of the handle didn't resolve itself in a quick, violent jerk, as I half expected. Instead, it continued to turn with agonizing slowness, each minute movement accompanied by elongated, shrill squeals that seemed to echo within the marrow of my bones. My breath hung suspended in the chill air of my bedroom, my hands clamped tightly over my mouth to stifle the scream clawing its way up my throat. Closer and closer, the door inched open, a sliver of darkness peering through the widening crack. A stench like damp soil and decay seeped into the room, settling heavy around me. Only the pale moonlight streaming through the window offered any illumination, casting long, sinister shadows across the floor that seemed to creep closer with each passing second. Paralyzed by terror, I watched as a hand, if one could call it that, appeared at the edge of the door. It was grotesquely elongated, the skin, or what served as skin, pale and translucent, veins dark and sprawling like the roots of a rotting tree. The fingers, tipped with nails cracked and black, curled slowly around the door frame, the sound of the nails scraping against the wood, a whisper of impending doom. The door opened further, a figure stepping into view, its form obscured by the darkness. It stood eerily still, just beyond the threshold of the closet. My eyes, wide open and unblinking, tried to make sense of the shape in front of me. It looked human, sort of, but stretched and distorted as if seen through a funhouse mirror. Where its eyes should have been, only deeper shadows existed, swirling with a menace that quickened my pulse to a frantic, erratic rhythm. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to throw myself from the bed and run as far and as fast as my legs could carry me. But terror rooted me to the spot, a silent scream etched permanently on my face. A low, rumbly, "ng" growl emanated from the figure, a sound so filled with malice it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, up into my feet, and coil sickeningly in my stomach. Then it spoke, or perhaps spoke isn't the right word. The sounds were guttural, broken, like the grinding of rocks. Yet, they formed words, words that made no sense to my mind, but which filled me with an inexplicable sorrow. Found, hide, lost. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, permeating the air and sinking into my skin. I wanted to ask, "What do you want?" The words perched on the tip of my tongue, frozen and unspoken. It took a step closer, the floorboards creaking under its inhuman weight. The moonlight fell upon its face, revealing features too twisted to belong to anything born of this world. The gaping maws where eyes should have been stared deep into mine, a cold, unbearable knowledge passing between us. I knew then, with crushing certainty, that this creature was born of this very house, a manifestation of all the dark secrets it held within its walls. It knew my name, my fears, the very essence of my soul. It claimed them all with its sightless gaze. Frozen, I could only watch as it continued its slow, deliberate approach, the terrible anticipation of its touch more frightful than any nightmare I had conjured in my waking hours. Its malformed hand reached toward me, seeking, grasping, almost loving in its slow trajectory. The sharp jerk of my bedroom door flying open broke through my paralysis. Light flooded the room, stark and sudden. My mother stood in the doorway, confusion and concern etching her features. "What's wrong?" she asked, eyes darting around the room. The creature, the thing, it vanished before her penetrating gaze, dissolved into the shadows as if it had never been. But the stench remained strong, and the cold dread in my gut told me it hadn't gone far. Mom noticed my pale face, the wide, horrified eyes. "Bad dream," she suggested softly, stepping closer. I couldn't bring myself to nod or speak. The room felt smaller, the shadows denser. And though the creature was gone, the words it had spoken rolled around in my mind, a twisted puzzle I was too afraid to solve. Even after she checked the closet, under my bed, and assured me that everything was fine, I knew differently. As she left, the parting words of the creature haunted the edges of my consciousness, etched deep like a promise or a curse. Never safe, always here. The door clicked shut, and I was alone again with the shadows and the silence of those words hanging heavy in the air.